Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 14 of my Whispers of the Old Gods card review. I have a handful of new cards in this review, plus a few that I seem to miss along the way, so in total there are about 7 cards that we're going to cover in this video. So let's go ahead and jump right into the first one, a brand new neutral legendary minion, the 1-mana Shifter Zerus. Now this is a pretty boring minion as a 1-mana 1/1 on its own, but the card effect on Shifter Zerus is really intriguing and could impact just how playable this card is in a pretty big way. So each turn this minion is in your hand, transform it into a random minion. Now the wording here is a little bit awkward, so presumably right at the start of your turn he'll transform into a new minion. So I don't know if you have this card in your mulligan, whether or not it will be Shifter Zerus, or even as soon as it hits your hand, right out of the mulligan. So if you keep it in the mulligan, if it's a new card right at that point. That's going to have to wait and see on that one. But either way, I like this card because it basically can fill holes in your deck and can turn into something good that you'd never expect and you can surprise your opponent with on certain turns. So in other words, on turn 1, let's say it's Shifter Zerus, you're probably not excited about playing a 1-mana 1/1, as you shouldn't be, that's pretty bad. But on turn 2, it could turn into a really powerful 2-drop that you don't have another 2-drop in your hand, and it allows you to get out onto the board and get out to a good tempo start. So perhaps you play it as a 2-drop, but maybe it was a Deathwing on turn 2 and it's totally unplayable, so you just have to wait for the next turn to see what happens. So essentially, there will be points in any given game where Shifter Zerus turns into a really cool minion that is playable, and he gives you the decision every turn if he's going to work this time. So I like the design of this card because occasionally you'll be playing Rogue and you'll get the perfect Tyrian Ford Ring. Some other times you might just need a 4-drop and you're happy to play a Chillwind Yeti so that you don't fall too far behind on the board, or just because you need a minion desperately. So there's a lot of upside for Shifter Zerus. There are a lot of potential curve-filling moments where he can hit. Now, admittedly, it's going to be very difficult for things to line up. Most minions are lower cost than they are higher cost, so he might fill curves more likely in the beginning of the game. And there's also some downside to Shifter Zerus, right? You might have a Tyrian Ford Ring on turn 7. So that won't help you at all, and by the time turn 8 rolls around, your Tyrian Ford Ring might turn into a Wisp. So there's going to be a lot of frustration, a lot of funny moments with Shifter Zerus, but I'm not sure he's actually a bad card, just because of the flexibility and the control over decisions that he offers. So skilled players who are able to make decisions and utilize RNG in handy ways might actually make this one fit in a different kind of mid-range average deck, or maybe even a control deck where you basically just wait multiple turns until this turns into something very, very powerful when you've got 10 plus turns at the end of the game, stretching towards fatigue. So I'll be interested to see how this one's played. It doesn't scream out as like the best card ever, but I think it's got a little bit of potential. Okay, so moving on, we've got the new Hunter legendary minion. It's Princess Huhuran. She is a 5-mana minion with a 6/5 stat line, which is actually pretty solid for 5 mana. It's really quite good. 6 health is typically better than 5 health, so 5/6 would trade much more effectively in a lot of stuff. But Hunters do okay. When minions are more aggressive, they do like to do face damage, as you well know. So sometimes a more aggressive stance on a minion is fine. Of course, 6/5 in stats hasn't really hurt Savannah Highmane in Hunter, so I think that's okay. But the battle cry here is actually really intriguing on Princess Huhuran. Trigger a friendly minion's death rattle effect. So essentially, with Huhuran, as long as you have something on the board with death rattle, you're getting an instant death rattle out of her. So a nice body plus an instant, sometimes incredibly powerful effect, right? So as I mentioned, Savannah Highmane. Imagine you've somehow already gotten a Savannah Highmane on the board. You play Princess Huhuran on turn 7 with your hero power, perhaps, and suddenly you've got the 2/2 hyenas that come out of Savannah Highmane on the board already for free. Piloted Shredder, you get a free 2-drop. There are 1,000 different death rattles, all of which have very strong effects. You could instantly steal a minion if you happen to have Sylvanas on the board. I just like this. It's It's a flexible card, so you get to choose when to activate that Death Rattle effect, whereas sometimes Death Rattles are a little bit reliant upon your opponent. It's going to be good in Hunter decks that focus on developing board presence with sticky Death Rattle minions, and there are a lot of those, and Hunter has been successful with that kind of archetype before, so I think Princess Huhuran will be a good 5-drop that deposits a threat onto the board, generates some resources, and occasionally makes big swing turns too with stuff like Sylvanas. So a pretty interesting card, a neat little design that combines Battle Cries and Death Rattles in a fun way, and I see a lot of potential and upside on this card. You could also do some crazy stuff with Bran Bronzebeard now that I think about it, doing double Death Rattles, so who knows where Princess Huhuran will go, but I'm pretty sure she's going to see some play in Hunter and might even become a staple mid-range minion. Moving on to a new mage card called Twilight Flamecaller. This is a 3-mana 2/2 that has a battle cry, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions. So essentially that battle cry is an Arcane Explosion tucked right into this card. But instead of 2 mana for Arcane Explosion, you're getting a 3-mana minion with the same effect with a 2/2 body attached. So essentially you're kind of getting a 2/2 for 1 mana extra with this card, which is pretty strong. Now admittedly, Arcane Explosion does benefit from spell synergies and spell damage buffs as well, so there's a little upside there. So it's not exactly a 1 mana conversion. But still, there's a lot bundled into this card. For 3 mana, I think this is pretty good value. It does affect the entire enemy board. It doesn't hurt your own minions. So you can clear a lot of stuff like Imps and Silverhand Recruits and Tiny Murlocs and who knows what else. So basically, you can kind of coin this out on turn 2 and kill a couple 1-drops that might have been played already. Just play it on curve on turn 3 to clean up the board. You can see a lot of different ways this card helps you either develop the board or regain the board. Whirlwind effects like this, particularly ones that don't hurt your own side of the board, are fantastic for clearing stuff up. So the 2/2 body's weak for a 3-drop, admittedly, but still does trade effectively and gives you something in exchange for a pretty powerful effect. So all in all, I might see this card as certainly playable and perhaps even pretty important in certain styles of mages that are contesting for board position in the early to mid game. Moving on to a new Druid card, the Dark Arakkoa. This card is kind of nuts, I think. I think it's a fantastic card, maybe even one of the best cards I've seen so far from Whispers of the Old Gods. For a 6-mana minion, you're getting a 5/7 Taunt, which in and of itself right there already makes this card pretty solid to me. A 5/7 Taunt line is something we haven't seen before, and it's really good. 5 attack is important because so much different stuff has 5 health. So anytime they have to trade multiple minions into this, sometimes, for instance, if they trade an Emperor Thaurissan into a Druid of the Claw taunt, the Emperor Thaurissan survives with 1 health, right? But if they trade it into a Dark Arakkoa, they have to kill their Emperor Thaurissan. So that 5 attack versus 4 attack, which we've seen from a lot of stuff, is a significant difference. And 7 health is strong too, because you can't 5 attack ping. You can still fireball ping, but that's a lot of investment to kill this card. So 5/7 stat line, fantastic. Taunt is important, particularly it seems like in the new style of Druid, which will not be reliant upon the combo since that has been nerfed out of existence. So I love the stats here, particularly when you consider something like a Boulder Fist Ogre, which is a 6/7 for 6, and that's like the vanilla stats you expect. You're really not losing much to gain the taunt here. Plus, all that aside, as good as that card is just on its default stats and taunt, it also has a battle cry that gives your Cthulhu +3/+3 wherever it is. So this is a Cthulhu synergy card like we've seen many in the past. It gives a better buff than most of the ones we've seen. It's a 3/3 instead of a 1/1 or a 2/2. So in a Cthulhu Druid deck, this card seems like a dream. You want to survive to turn 10 or later so that you can both draw into your Cthulhu and play your Cthulhu. You need to survive behind taunts to do that. Dark Arakkoa fits that playstyle, buffs your Cthulhu in a major way. All around, fantastic Cthulhu synergy card, and maybe even playable in non-Cthulhu decks just because it's pretty strong and an interesting mana curve. Druid typically doesn't have a lot of good 6-drops. They got good stuff at the 5, great stuff at the 7. 6 sometimes falls a little short depending upon what legendaries you slot in. So I like this card. Common quality is going to be great too for players on a budget who want to craft a really strong mid to high end minion. So I'm all about Dark Arakkoa. I think it's a cool card. Up next is one of the cards I missed. This one was revealed a little while ago compared to this video's release, but we're catching up to address it now. It is the Warlock Legendary, a very famous Warcraft character at that, Cho'Gall. This is a 7-mana minion. It has 7 attack and 7 health, and the battle cry is the next spell you cast this turn costs health instead of mana. So that's a really interesting effect, right? Warlocks have a number of different cards that force them to spend health as a resource, and typically they're pretty okay to do that. So Cho'Gall is essentially a tempo play that says you can get a really big minion out, 7 mana, 7/7. Who's going to complain about that? And if you're willing to sacrifice just a little health, you can also make a big play with 1 spell. So this isn't every spell you cast. This is the next spell you cast. But you can cast some pretty powerful spells. So you can get Cho'Gall Siphon Soul, for instance, right? You'd lose 6 health, you'd gain 3 health back from Siphon Soul, of course, but you could also just hard remove a minion. So you could play Cho'Gall and then AoE removal. You might hurt your Cho'Gall a little, but it would allow you to still establish a body while dealing with your opponent's board. So this gives you both initiative and board presence, while also giving you extra resources to react to your opponent's board, which is always nice. If you can react and establish something strong, that's a very good play in Hearthstone, and that's the design of Cho'Gall. And also remember, if it's like turn 10, for instance, you can actually Cho'Gall cast a spell, say a 7-mana spell, just make something up, lose 7 health, and you'll still have 3 mana remaining that turn, so you can still do other stuff. You can cast 2 spells, for instance, depending on how much health you wanted to sacrifice, how much mana you have available, all kinds of different things that can happen. All that said, it's a cool effect. I like the design. It's neat for Warlock. I don't actually think Cho'Gall is that good. It's nice to react. It's nice to develop, but it's just 1 minion. It's kind of susceptible to hard removal. It's susceptible to big game hunter still, even after the nerfs. It's going to be more value, more tempo nowadays with big game hunter, but still susceptible. So you're putting all your eggs in one basket. You're harming yourself, and it turns 7. It feels worse to injure yourself than it does early in the game. So you have to balance a lot of downsides with Cho'Gall. The upside for a big swing turn is there, but I feel like your opponent will be able to swing you right back compared to something like a Dr. Boom, where they have to really answer the board in multiple ways because of both Dr. Boom and his boom bots, and the boom bots tended to react to the opponent's board as well. Cho'Gall feels inferior to me. That said, I think you'll still see some play in really slow Warlock decks that have creative ways to heal, and some really powerful spells that can utilize big swing turns late in the game. So, neat design. I would still argue an average card. After that is a hunter minion called Forlorn Stalker. This is a 3-mana minion. It's a 4/2. So an interesting stat allocation there. 2 health is pretty weak at the 3 slot, but 4 attack is pretty scary if they don't find a way to deal with it immediately. So good for hunters who are trying to hit the face. Has a battle cry as well. Give all Death Rattle minions in your hand +1/+1. So interesting card. You're not giving up that much in stats as a 4/2. It's going to trade pretty effectively unless they ping it off or have a Frostbolt or something to deal with it. But a battle cry that actually builds you up for later in the game, which is not something that Hunter typically sees. Remember, this is Death Rattle minions in your hand, not on your board. So this rewards resource hoarding. The more cards and Death Rattle minions you have in your hand, the bigger the benefit for Forlorn Stalker. So it does not reward unloading your hand on the board, which traditionally Hunter has done. So it rewards slower play, resource hoarding, and the minion itself doesn't actually lend towards late game play. So it's interesting kind of counterbalanced design here. Seems like an aggressively stanced minion, but also seems to benefit late game plays, or at least mid game plays. So I'm not really sure where Forlorn Stalker lives. There are a number of cards pushing Hunter Death Rattle synergies, as we saw with Princess Huhuran, so maybe this just fits into a Hunter Death Rattle deck pretty nicely to play on curve. But I'm afraid the minion's just a little bit too susceptible and a little bit too split in what it's trying to accomplish to actually be a strong inclusion. Up next is the last card I'm going to look at in this video. There are actually some more, but we're going to stop here for now. This is the 4-mana Twilight Summoner neutral minion. It's a 1/1 for 4 mana. That's not that good, right? Maybe not, but it has a Death Rattle. Summon a 5/5 Faceless Destroyer. So in total, you're going to get 2 minions out of this card, most likely. A 1/1 to start, and a 5/5 after that effect. So that's 6/6 in total stats for 4 mana, which is actually relatively strong, right? You would expect something like a 4/5 in vanilla stats, but 6/6 is much better. So Twilight Summoner is really kind of the new Nerubian Egg, if you will, but at 4 mana. So instead of a 2 mana Nerubian Egg that gives you a total of 4/6 in stats, this is a 4 mana Nerubian Egg style card that gives you 6/6 in stats. And I would argue that this is substantially worse than Nerubian Egg. You're only really getting a couple extra attack of total stats. The one difference, of course, is that Twilight Summoner can activate itself. In other words, it can attack, can sacrifice itself to make it a little bit more reliable and easier to get the 5/5 Faceless Destroyer out. But that said, no one's ever had trouble activating the Nerubian Egg before. Entire decks are designed around that fact, and that has never kept it out of a deck in the past, right? If the deck is designed to work well with Nerubian Egg, activating it is not an issue. So the benefit from Twilight Summoner being able to activate itself is pretty minor in my eye, and the 5/5 is only slightly better than the Nerubian Egg you get, the Nerubian you get from Nerubian Egg. So the 2 mana cost penalty there is pretty rough, I think. Plus, one benefit of Nerubian Egg that is rarely discussed is that it's actually an area of effect dampener. So if they cast area of effect spells and your Nerubian Egg is still unpopped, then they kind of punish themselves with AoEs, because it's hard for them to deal with the first half of that Nerubian Egg sometimes. The Twilight Summoner is actually a little easier. They can just ping this off with a Mage ping, a Druid ping, any 1 damage thing, get rid of it much more efficiently and effectively than they can a Nerubian Egg, and then cast their AoE and deal with Faceless Destroyer. So it might even be a little less good at denying AoE, despite the larger body on the second half. So if this was designed as a replacement for Nerubian Egg, I think it's a major failure and a much worse card, because you're just committing so much extra mana, and turn 4 is so important, and it's basically slowing you down longer, because turn 2 is weaker anyway, so you can spend the time to invest in Nerubian Egg, whereas this one, you're so far into the game already that you're trying to accomplish things instead of trying to set things up. So it's awfully slow, big tempo loss right away, and even the payout's not that high. So I'm not high on Twilight Summoner. I'm actually pretty low on Twilight Summoner. I think it's a weak card, and I don't think many decks will find room for it. So sad, because it's cool looking and a fun design, but not very good. And that'll do it for part 14 of my review. Pretty nifty cards today. I'm curious to see how they shake out. If you have any questions or thoughts on these cards, please do leave a comment. I'd love to see it. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.